Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's so lovely to have you all here. My name is Lisa Bayless, and I'm so grateful that you've given up some of your time to share this time with me. Before we even get started, I would really like to thank the K-12 Workplace Wellbeing webinar series for hosting this session today, and particularly EdCan team for their Well at Work initiative. This initiative is doing really great work to make workplace well-being from K-12 education a top priority. And how cool is that? So you can check out, if you haven't already, all the work that Well at Work is doing at www.edcan.ca/well at work. So check them out. So welcome to Friday afternoon. Again, my name is Lisa Bayless. I am a high school teacher and counselor here in Victoria, British Columbia. And I'd also like to just acknowledge that this land is as the Algonquin speaking people, especially the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. And when I was told, when we talk about our lands, we just really need to be aware and grateful for our lands. And so my friend Monique Graysmith says, when we share where we're from, we need to actually acknowledge that, you know, today in the lands where I'm from, the smoke has finally cleared. Our trees are starting to be able to breathe and give us oxygen again. And as we all come into the weekend, hopefully our lands will open up and give us the space to continue to play and to live. And I just have a lot of gratitude to be from these beautiful lands today. So welcome if you're just arriving. Again, my name is Lisa, and I'm so grateful that you've shown up and are here with us today. We are here to talk about how self-compassion can help you as an educator in these really difficult times. So, as I was just saying, one of the things that I love to do is just acknowledge that I'm here from the Algonquin-speaking people's territory, also known as the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. And one of the words that the elders have taught me, and it's a Salish phrase, it's called Natsamat. And Natsamat means this unity or working together or coming together. And so as we're all arriving here and we're coming together to learn and to be together in this space from whatever lands you're arriving from, I just want to acknowledge this concept of Natsamat. And one of my favorite teachers taught me too that not only does it mean of a coming together and being as one, it's also an alignment of this coming together of our heart and our head. And as educators, this practice of coming together from our heart and our head can have a huge impact on how we arrive in our schools, in our classrooms, and how we arrive together. So if you're just arriving, my name is Lisa Bayless. I am a high school teacher and a counselor. I work at Esquimalt High School in Victoria, British Columbia. I'm also a mom. I have two beautiful kids. Benjamin's 10 and Gracie is almost 9 on Monday. And they are incredible humans that keep me practicing all of this work on a regular basis. I'm a mindfulness teacher. I work in and teach a program called Mindfulness for Educators, and I'm a qualified mindful self-compassion teacher, and I had the privilege of being trained by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, and I'm going to speak to them and about their work today as well. But before we go any further, what I would love for all of us to do is just arrive here together. And what does that mean? That means all of you have had to shift and change and leave something behind or change your days to be here. And so I'm just so grateful that you've taken the time to do that. And so to arrive together, let's take a moment to actually just fully be here. So in this invitation, I invite you to, if you're sitting and holding anything, put your pens down, put your coffee down, put anything that's in your hand down, close your doors, and just find a little bit of stillness into your body, into your being. If it feels right, to just notice how your feet are being held by the floor, maybe how your shoes are feeling on your feet. And if there's an invitation to maybe close your eyes or lower your gaze down. And just see how your body is being held in whatever space that you are in right now. Maybe how your seat is on a chair. And how this human body just may be vibrating or pulsating. Just coming into this body again. We get so busy doing that we forget to just be. And if it feels right to offer yourself a really nice, deep inhale, a nourishing breath that just fills you up. I invite you to fill up with whatever it is that you need right now. And then on your exhale, just really intentionally releasing whatever it is you don't need, just letting go and being at ease in your body for just this moment. Again, giving yourself permission to just be intentionally here in this body, on this webinar, to learn together, to be together. Allowing your breath to just come back to its natural rhythm and just sitting and settling into the space that you're in. Maybe for a moment, noticing if there's any sounds around you, things that are pulling you away, and see if we can just be with them. The acknowledging of the sounds, the grounding of our body, and the being with our breath, all anchors in helping us just arrive in this moment. And when that feels complete for you, I invite you to open your eyes again and come on back here to this time together. So I often start with that as an opportunity just to take a couple minutes as a soft landing to just be here together. Usually I do it more for me than I do it for you. I know I'm feeling a little bit nervous right now, a little bit anxious, having so many lovely beings and educators here with us in the room today. So a couple things I'm going to share with you over the next 45 minutes, some work around self-compassion, some mindfulness practices and compassion practices. I'm going to leave you with 3 techniques that you can use and take and go right into your classroom with, and into your schools that you can use over the weekend and practice. I'm going to invite you to, there's a chat, at times I'm going to ask you to jump in on the chat. I'm going to invite you to use that when we ask it, but if you don't need to, just leave it alone, hide it away. Sometimes that chat can be more of a distraction. If you have a burning question, see if you can throw it down on a Post-it note or on a piece of paper beside you. We're going to come back to the end and we'll have a bit of time to really go over some questions that you might have around how to integrate mindfulness, self-compassion practices into your life, into your classroom, and for yourself. A lot of the work that I'm going to talk about today is from the research by Dr. Kristen Neff and by Dr. Chris Germer. And again, I'm really privileged to have learned with them and from them. And I had the opportunity to work with Kristen this past November. Actually, I was down in California. We filmed a course for mindful schools called Self-Compassion for Educators. I've just shown these 3 books because if any of this work that I'm going to share with you today is perking a little bit and you're interested in reading more, this is a really great place to start from. Their books are really informative and easy reads to dive into this work a little bit more. So compassion really is around how to meet ourselves in a moment when there's struggle or suffering. That's what self-compassion is. But before we get into that, I actually have an activity I want you to try with me. As a teacher, I love interaction and I love to make sure that we're working together on things. So play with me for a few minutes and let's try this together. So this activity is called How I Treat a Friend. And what I need you to do is actually get out a piece of paper or a pen, or you can make some notes on your phone if you need to. But I really want you to, for a moment, think about a friend, perhaps a colleague of yours, who is suffering or struggling in some way. Perhaps could be they're back to school in a pandemic and they're really having a hard time with being back in their classroom. Or blended learning is just such a challenge right now. Or maybe there's a health problem and it's really difficult for them. So I want you to think, maybe even if you need to close your eyes and just really visualize this close friend of yours or this colleague who's really struggling with the day-to-day beings of being in school or in their life. And for a moment, I want you to take your pen and your paper and I want you to write down, what are the words that you offer your friend? What are the things that you say to them when your dearest one here is struggling? What are some of the words you say? Maybe even pay attention to, what does the tone sound like when you're talking to them? What's your body language like? We're not going to be here long, so just taking a few minutes to just jot a few things down. I would really love it. Thinking again, if you have a friend or a colleague who's just really struggling, what are the words that you might offer them in this moment? Because we don't have a lot of time here together, what I want you to do then is, once you've got a few of those words down, I want you to also next think, Think of a time when you were struggling with the exact same things. So maybe you're having a really hard time being back during a pandemic and in your classroom, or perhaps you're having a hard time managing this new way of being. Or maybe it's a struggle for you in a relationship right now or with a student. Perhaps whatever it is, what I want you to also think and write down for a moment are, what did you say to yourself at that moment? What are the words that you offer to yourself when it's challenging? What does your tone of voice sound like? What kind of body language do you have? Taking a moment or two just to write those down. And then I'd invite you, this is a great time to just check in with the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Was there a difference between maybe what you offer to a friend or a colleague, or perhaps what you say to yourself? And you can just throw in, yes, there was a difference, or no, there wasn't much of a difference. I'd love to see in the chats how you responded to just this very quick activity. I think it's Flora. Thanks, Flora. I see you. Yes, it was a difference, I think is what you're saying. Yes, there was a difference. How do you notice? I feel like I'm a lot harsher to myself, Andre says. I don't think you're alone there, Andre. Caitlin, I see you. Yeah, yes, this is different. Linda says, I recognize that I'm more critical with myself. I don't think you're alone here, Lyndon. I think many of us might start to notice that big difference. Yeah, I'm much more gentle with friends and I'm a lot firmer with myself. I'm seeing a huge difference. I'm much harder on myself. Well, all of you who are feeling that way, you're not alone. So the research that has come out of Kristen Neff's and Marissa Knox's work is that through the US, most of the general population are more compassionate towards others than themselves. There's a few, and some of us can relate to this. So if you weren't that kind of person, if you actually could find some tenderness for yourself and you were like, yeah, friend, suck it up, that's okay too, right? Some of us are able to meet ourselves with compassion and struggle with giving it to other people. And then there's this, 16% of us that are kind of equal, that we can do both. And during these really difficult times of, new ways of being in schools and pandemics and September, man, you don't even need a pandemic for September to be hard as an educator. One of the things that we would really love is to see, how do we support ourselves? How do we get back to that percentage of being kind to ourselves and to other people? So, this practice made a huge impact for me when I first started doing some of these practices. And one of the things that I noticed really was that I too was really harsh to myself. And I found that it was really easy to be gentle with and kind to my students, to my friends. I found that I had kind and gentle words to my own kids, right? But when it came back to myself, I found I was really critical and judgmental, and I was really harsh on myself. And one of the things that really shifted for me is I had an opportunity to listen to my daughter, Gracie, and she was 8 and she was having just a really tough day. And I found myself saying really gentle things to herself. And I was listening to how she was speaking to herself, and already a critical voice was coming out, this integrated voice of just, I'm not good enough. This is hard. And it broke my heart to hear that. And any of you who sort of have been a parent or seen your students do this, this is a really hard thing to experience. And I realized one of the things that I needed to start doing was modeling, not only offering her kind words, but offering myself kindness in these moments. So I started practicing. And one of the things I realized is that the way I talk to myself, often I would never say out loud to her. These were just words that I would never, ever use towards somebody I loved or I was dear with. And I thought, what if I tried to work on shifting that? What if maybe the way I talk to myself would be also the words that I talk to when I meet my daughter, when I meet with my students, and when I meet with someone else? So this practice, although it's quick and it's short, it has a huge impact on just recognizing, starting to be aware of perhaps that critical voice that's coming up and within us. So one of the things that I started with today is I said I was going to give you 3 practices to try. And this is the first one, just as an opportunity in our everyday life. Start noticing, how do you talk to yourself? What are the words that you say? And would you say them out loud to anybody else? Would you say them to your bestie, to your dear friend? Or would that be an opportunity to really check in and think, how can I meet myself the way I would want other people to be treated? So thanks for your comments in chat. I really appreciate you engaging in that. We're here to talk about self-compassion today, and that was our first exercise in our first little practice. But what I really want to do is sort of teach you and give you a little bit of a background information. So what is self-compassion? So a lot of this work is based on Kristen Neff's research, and she has what she calls the 3 components of self-compassion. So I just want to touch on them a little bit. We're gonna dive into them a little bit deeper in a few minutes. But these 3 components: mindfulness, which is the ability to actually recognize that we're stressed, that man, there's a struggle going on. And this one I think is probably sometimes really difficult when we're in our schools and classrooms, because we're in do mode and we're in go and we're in our drive and we're planning our lessons and we're teaching or we're engaging with students. And sometimes we get so caught up in being there for everybody else that we didn't realize that within ourselves we're starting to feel stress, and that starts to come up. So the mindfulness really is a huge component in bringing in an awareness to ourselves, being aware that before we burn out, get exhausted, get too tired, snap, flip our lid, we're actually aware that it's starting to come up. So this piece is really important. The second component Kristen talks about is this concept of self-kindness. And this is what we sort of just touched on. Actually being supportive and understanding towards ourselves, meeting ourselves kindly rather than attending to that harsh critic that comes in, treating ourselves the way we would a dear friend, a loved one, our own child. And then the last component is this concept of connectedness, or common humanity. And what a lovely term, and how so important right now and these days of this global pandemic, and this time when we're all, as many as educators across Canada, going back to school and trying to figure this out. This is that concept that really, you're not alone. We're all in this together, and we may be having different levels of stress and response with it. But remember that everybody struggles at one time or another, that everybody goes through challenges, and that when we start to feel the overwhelm, the stress, that the intentionality of feeling like this is just too much, we have to stop and pause, bring in that mindfulness and say, other people feel this too. I'm not alone in this experience. So why are we doing this? Well, that's the what, but what is the why? Why do we practice this? Well, a lot of the research that's coming out now is showing that when we practice self-compassion, when we bring these practices to ourselves first, leads to more happiness. We're practicing more gratitude, optimism, savoring practices, and we're interacting in better relationships with other people when we're able to attend to these self-compassion practices for ourselves. We tend to get less stressed. The more we practice this, we're starting to be aware of our inner critic and our perfectionist thinking tendencies. Many of the educators I know tend to want to do things really, really well. We tend to be a little bit more A-type. There tends to be a little bit more anxiety around wanting to make sure we do things right. Our stress levels kind of go up quite quickly. The self-compassion practice really allows us to meet those, and it's a powerful antidote in supporting our stress response. And lastly, through this research, what they found is that people are actually more resilient, that we recognize that when bad things happen, that we are not alone and we can bounce back and we're able to learn through our mistakes. So what a better time than to understand these practices than a time when we're all feeling maybe a little resiliently low, tired and stressed, and it's only mid-September. So this is the practices that can help us move forward. So I said I was going to teach you 3 practices today. And the first one, remember, can we treat ourselves the way we would treat a dear friend? The second one's a little bit more of the science-based, and I want to talk a little bit about it. This is the physiology of self-compassion. So this is kind of how our brain works. And I'm going to show you this slide because I love it. It's based on Paul Gilbert's compassion focused therapy. And he talks about how we have these 3 drive systems in our body that help our emotional regulation. So these 3 drives are our threat system, which is our fight or flight, our drive system, which is what makes us go, what can we do, how do we be productive, and then a soothing system. This is our comfort and our rest system and our care system. And in today's world, many of us are sitting in this sort of threat defense system in a regular practice. This part of our brain is what's also known as our reptilian brain, and it's used when we perceive a threat, and our amygdala goes up, and we start to fire, and we go into what's called a fight, flight, or freeze response. And this response is amazing, and it's great to protect our bodily selves. Gets us out of the way of a bear that's chasing us, or a fast car that's coming down the road, or a hot thing on the stove. this threat defense system is really, really active. However, most of what we're going through these days, there isn't a lot of harm to our bodily self. And so what happens is our threat defense system starts to attack other things. And when what we start to do is attack our self-concept a little bit. When we feel inadequate, when we're feeling overwhelmed, we start criticizing ourselves. And we also tap into this threat defense system. And this system is constantly creating a fight or flight response in our world. And what we know in today's world is that the modern set response to stress is somewhere up there at a fight, flight, or freeze response on a regular basis. And what do we try and do when we're out there and we're stressed all the time is we just keep driving. We just keep pushing. And we go into this drive system. And if you see these red and blue circles, we kind of just keep going back. We have a stress response. We jump in and we continue to push. But what happens is we don't get there and we start to feel overwhelmed and we burn out and we start to fall backwards. We start to see this concept of compassion fatigue that we talk about so much as educators, or burnout. And this is because what happens is we're continually going back and forth between this threat system that's causing us to push and our drive system. What we really need to learn to do is attend to this other system, which is our soothing system or our caregiving system. Because luckily for us, we're not reptiles and we are born with a different part in our brain. And we have this prefrontal cortex that starts to develop at a very young age. And as babies, we have learned to adapt to our environment and to learn to need to have a caring environment to help us survive. We used it to help stay safe and to keep us alive when we were little. And it was triggered when we were babies by these lovely things around, beautiful vocal tones and soothing touch. Just think about holding, a newborn baby in your hands and what do? We rock. I still find myself, as a mama, bouncing sometimes in the grocery store because, for years, all I did was bounce my babies, or I rock and I constantly am kind of soothing myself by rocking. We have these systems in us that we were triggered when we were really young, and they generated a system of safety within our body. And for so long as we've grown up, we tend to ignore them. We forget to go back to them. But self-compassion is a great place to remember that we can access them again. When we access physical gestures and gentle tone of voice, we can actually generate a safety that counteracts that threat defense system. When we go from a threat system to our care system, we're able to attend to the stress, and then it allows us to go back into the drive system a little bit instead of crashing back and forth all the time. One of the best things we can do to care for ourselves right now is to continue to offer ourselves calming tone and touch and voice. So I want to touch on this just really quickly. And the first thing I want to talk about is that gentle tone of voice. My guess as an educator, you have that voice in you that you use often when you meet other people. Again, thinking back to that exercise about how did we meet a friend, right? I asked you to think of your tone of voice. When we see somebody who's struggling, often we can find a gentle tone. Oh, honey, that's hard for you. We don't always use that same tone of voice with ourselves, but it makes such a huge impact on how we respond to what's going on. I can end this webinar today and I can be like, oh, that just didn't go well. Hardly any people showed up. I didn't do very good. I was just I'm just really disappointed. My tone could shift and I could be like, oh, well, that didn't go so well. Not a lot of people showed up and I don't know if I did my best, but that's okay. And when we start to pay attention to how we talk to ourselves, tone can shift how we respond and integrate that caregiving system a little bit and gently meet us a little bit more. The other thing that helps is this concept of soothing touch. Again, I want you to think about how you pick up a baby when they're crying. We hold them and we rock them and we pat them and we hold them. Or we see a student who's struggling a little one. Maybe pre-COVID, we would wrap our arms around them, or we would just sit near somebody who was really struggling and have a presence with them. We can offer that often to other people, but we forget to offer this to ourselves. And this practice is available to us anytime, anywhere, and nobody even needs to know we're doing it. This is the great thing. So when I first started this, it was super weird. So I'm just going to lay this out there because some of you may be going like, well, this is a little woo-woo. Come on, Bayless. I don't know. This just doesn't seem like it's going to help. And I get it, because when I first said, like, maybe just put a hand to your heart and we're going to practice it in a second, I was like, no way, no way, Jose. This is just not going to work for me. But I have to say is that what I've discovered is as I've practiced self-compassion over the last many years of teaching it and generating it and having my own embodied practice is that my hands go to my heart or to myself all the time to soothe myself. And I'll give you an example. Last week we were back to school as BC educators, and on Tuesday and Wednesday we had 2 days without kids, so we could just land in our classrooms and get to know and sit through the rules and the regulations of COVID and new ways of being. And the first thing that I needed to do was land into a meeting for 2.5 hours around health and safety in our schools, as many of you probably had to as well. And I went into the theater, mask on and sitting around so many people. It was the most people I'd been around in almost 6 months. And I sat down and I was so happy to be back to school, to be with my colleagues. But like as many of us, also just wanting to do this safely and feeling super overwhelmed. And as I sat there and watched my administration, who are amazing and were bouncing with joy because they were so happy to have people in the rooms with them, and they were sharing how thrilled they were, I could feel my own anxiety rising, and I could just feel my heart rate was racing, and my mask was having a hard time for me to breathe. And I was just like, I might have to leave. Like, I don't know if I can sit here. And so what I did is, that mindfulness awareness of my stress developing came up, and I just continued to offer a hand to my heart. And then I put 2 hands on my heart and I just sort of held my chest for a moment. And I took a deep breath and I just continued to say, like, wow, this is hard. Yeah, it's really difficult right now in your body to be back. And when I did this, I continued to just kind of gently put pressure on my heart. And what it did is it reminded my body, because our body is really slow moving. Our minds, oh my goodness, they are fast. How many of you are having thoughts all the time, right? We are fast thinking, doing human beings, but our bodies, they work slow. So when we attend to our bodies, when we give our body just a moment of a soothing touch, what it does is it reminds us to slow down. And then it allows our brains to slow down a little bit. And so for that almost 2.5 hours of sitting in this, in the theater in my school for a 2.5 hour health and safety meeting, I continued to just offer myself soothing touch over and over again. And what it did is it allowed my body to regulate. It allowed that care system, that, that circle of tending to ourselves, to be safe enough so that I could stay present in this meeting. And it was hard. It wasn't easy, but I didn't have to leave and I was able to get through all the information. So I would like to just practice this with you. And again, I know it's a little bit, strange at first, but play with me for a few minutes, would you? So what I want us to do is just take a minute to learn a little bit about soothing touch. So as you're sitting wherever you are in any space, I invite you, if it feels right, again, maybe just lowering your gaze or closing your eyes. Just being aware of your body again, maybe noticing if perhaps there's any like trickling feelings of like, this is weird, or I'm kind of anxious even thinking about this, or perhaps if there's any other stresses that are going on in your life. And I invite you just to start with perhaps putting a hand to your heart, just one, and seeing what it feels like, just really being within your body to notice how it feels to just hold your heart for a moment. Integrating this heart and head again, this natsamat, bringing it back together. If it feels right, you can even use 2 hands if perhaps you need even a little bit more pressure. Just being with your body, saying, it's safe, you're okay. Sometimes this feels a little bit strange when you're feeling at ease. So it's okay, just play with it. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, can you just be gentle about that too? Perhaps trying to put a fist over your hand or your heart and then your hand, maybe as a little bit more of a boundary setting or a fierce compassion, a way of like protecting yourself in this moment. Maybe you offer one hand to your heart and one to your stomach, just holding your torso, maybe noticing how your body is being breathed in this moment. Maybe you can bring one hand up to your cheek and just sort of cup your cheek the way you might hold a darling's face, maybe even 2 hands. What would that feel like, just to hold your face? Maybe you even might want to take 2 arms and just hug and hold your arms. Just sitting, maybe stroking your arms. Again, just bringing an awareness into your body, or maybe just holding your hands. Again, these practices don't always feel like there's something that we need when we don't need them. So if we're feeling at ease right now or comfortable on a Friday afternoon and these just feel a little bit strange to you, I invite you to just start to recognize, how do you maybe comfort yourself in a moment of stress or in struggle? How do you normally show up? If you start to notice, often you hold your arms when you're stressed or you rock a little bit. These are natural tendencies that we often go to anyways. I was at the dentist a few weeks ago and was having some work done, and I don't hate the dentist, but I don't love it, and I could feel my hands just tightening up, and my other hand just started to hold it. And it was like I was holding my partner's hand and just continuing to stroke it. And I don't know about you at the dentist, but I'm always tight and tense. And all I did during that time was I just sort of continued to give myself a little bit of soothing touch. So maybe just jump back in the chat room here for a second and let me know, what were any of those gentle touches, did they work for you? What did you notice? Maybe bringing your hand to your heart helped, maybe cupping your cheek. I'd love to see, just by a comment in the chat for a second, what was that like for you? If you didn't love it, can you be a little bit gentler with yourself about that too? I'd love to know what worked for you. It was comforting. Adriana, thanks for sharing that. There's this comfort level that we can offer ourselves in this moment. It created some open space. Mel McIsaac, hello. I like both the hands on my heart. It immediately calmed me down. Yeah, there's a sense of soothing or supportive feeling. And I love how, I think Flora says, I've been using this all my life and without even knowing how it was soothing myself. And so I think I want to just bring that up too, this intention of how would it be different if we did it with intention? All of these practices are not difficult. In fact, they're quite easy. They're just hard to remember. And when we start to remember to do them with intention, it shifts how we show up. Yeah, I love how we rub. My son loves that too, Linda. A rub at his back at night. My daughter too. Can you rub my back? Mindfulness moments in yoga class. This gentle soothing and supporting ourselves with touch. So again, remember I said I was going to offer you 3 strategies or practices that you could take away with, that you could use right away. The first one was, can we treat ourselves in a kind tone? Words, can we use those words? This is the second one. Can we offer ourselves supportive touch and tone? Again, it's one of these practices that you can use and nobody even has to know you're doing it. I sat through that staff meeting and probably nobody knew I was in a state of panic and feeling overwhelmed. But I continued to offer myself supportive touch during these practices to just help regulate my body. And this is what we want to do in a classroom when we're starting to feel and we're aware that we're, dysregulated and struggling. Can we meet ourselves with some kindness and some compassion and a beautiful touch? Absolutely. Andre says, can you do this when other people's around? My hand goes to my heart all the time. I often use it when talking to my colleagues who are struggling. When I listen with a student, I'm a counselor, I sit and I hear their stories, and wow, I can feel my own sense of overwhelm come up. And this is, to meet compassion means to meet someone with their suffering. And it's a really positive emotion. But often when other people are suffering, we start to empathize and we use a part of our brain that also triggers a stress response. Empathy often triggers stress. And we can use this to stay in a compassionate, positive response without getting stressed ourselves. So a hand to our heart, holding our arms, even just being like, oh, recognizing that this is hard. When I'm in the classroom and I'm teaching, if I can feel the sense of energy around me and my students are just getting to a crazy energy and I need a moment, often I'll just stop and take a breath and put my hands on my heart and just remember that it starts with me. When I embody these practices for myself first, it starts to be able to shift how I show up in the world and show up with my students and with my colleagues. So those are 2 places that are really great places to start from. The last practice and exercise I want to offer you today is one called a self-compassion break. And I was so excited. Last week in BC, we had a webinar offered to us by Kim Shornight-Reichel, Monique Grace Smith, and Linda O'Neill. And they were talking about how to bring, compassion thinking into our thoughts and into our bodies, and how to really care for ourselves. It was hosted by Open Schools. Kim Shornight-Reichel kept saying one of the best things we can do as educators is to offer ourselves a self-compassion break. And I'm so thrilled to be able to offer you how to do that, because one of the things that we need to be able to do is not just talk about it and know it, but actually to feel it. So a self-compassion break is something you can do in a practice as a meditation. You can see it on Insight Timer, which is an app that you can download for free, and you can find Kristen Neff doing it for free. Or you can do this in just a few mere moments, like we're going to do right now. And this practice is just one that we can use in a moment of a struggle or a moment of suffering. So thanks for staying with me. You're doing amazing. I'm so grateful you're all continuing to be here and to practicing along with me. Let's try one last thing. This is the third practice I want to offer you today, and I want you to just see what it feels like. Self-compassion is really an embodied experience, and so to be able to really understand it, we have to feel it. So I'm going to invite you to just settle into your bodies one more time. And this time, if it feels right to close your eyes, you can close your eyes, just let them fall partially down, but really just coming into your body again. And I'm going to invite you to bring to mind a situation in your life that's difficult right now, that's actually causing stress. Could be a health problem, could be going back to school during a pandemic, could be a difficult class, could be trying to manage blended learning, could be an issue with a colleague or a work problem. I do want you to choose one, though, that's on the mild to moderate range. So if your brain is spinning with all the stresses in your life, let's not jump into the one that's like an 8, 9, or 10. Not a big problem, because we don't want to overwhelm ourselves when we first start doing this. So just taking a few minutes to land on just one, and if many are going through, what's one that's like, when you think about it, it's a 5 or a 6 out of all the stresses in your life? One that when you feel it, you can actually feel enough stress in your body so that it feels stressful, but not too much that puts you into overwhelm. And again, if many are going through your head, just choose one. And I invite you to allow yourself to really see and hear and feel your way into this problem. To the extent that you feel that uneasiness in your body, maybe you want to shift, maybe there's a tightness in your chest, maybe there's a tightness in your throat, maybe it's just hard to sit in it. When you start to notice the discomfort in your body, I invite you to very slowly and kindly say to yourself, whoa, this is a moment of suffering, or this is struggle. This is what stress feels like. This is the first component of the self-compassion practices. This is mindfulness. When we actually can feel in our bodies what stress or struggle or suffering feels like. You might even name it, like, oh, my chest is just vibrating, or my shoulders are at my ears. This is stressful. This whole situation is stressful. This hurts. Dan Siegel calls it the name it to tame it. Can we just name that this is hard? And then I'm going to invite you to offer yourself another phrase. I'm going to invite you to say, suffering is just a part of living. Or other options could be something like, I'm not alone, other people struggle too. We all struggle in our lives. This is the common humanity, the fact that we're all in this together, that nobody's alone. In fact, everybody sitting with you on this call right now is feeling some amount of stress in their body. So we mindfully pay attention to it. We remind ourselves we're not alone. And then if it feels right to offer hands to your heart, or another gentle and warming touch using your hands somewhere, if that felt right in any way, I invite you to offer that right now. And then offer yourself, may I be kind to myself, even if it's just for this moment. This is the self-kindness, the loving kindness May I give myself what I need right now. May I accept myself as I am. And if that's feeling difficult or you're not sure what right words you might want to offer yourself right now, then think back to that exercise of a friend who may be struggling, someone who's having the same issue as you. What would you say to them, heart to heart? And if your friends were just to hold a few words in their heart, what would they be? And can you give yourself that same gentle message? Can you offer yourself just a little bit of tenderness in this moment? This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of living. May I be kind to myself. May I offer myself the compassion I need. Suffering is inevitable. Struggles are hard. September is tough, my friends. Teaching, man, September is never easy. We cannot take away all of the stresses that come up into our lives this month and throughout the year. And especially in this unprecedented new year, new way of being with kids. It's not the same, and it's triggering all kinds of emotional responses for us. Can we meet ourselves in that moment with just a little bit more gentleness, a little bit more tenderness? So I offered you 3 practices to take away with you today. 1, can you treat yourself as you would treat a good friend? Can you use those words? Can you meet yourself with maybe a tender touch or tone at any time? And can you practice that self-compassion break in the moment? And you can do this, taking 1 minute, maybe if you're stressed on your way to school and you arrive in the parking lot before you go in, can you offer yourself a moment, some of these words, a little bit of mindfulness, the shared common humanity, and then meet yourself with kindness and tenderness? These practices will have a huge impact in developing a compassionate community and spreading compassion around our schools. Because what we know is that it really does start with ourselves, and we want to embody and practice these for ourselves first. This is a really important piece before we spread it anywhere else. Because when we've embodied it for ourselves and we've practiced it for ourselves, it's much easier then to jump in and to build it into the community around us, to start to have positive and compassionate interpersonal relations with other people, to show up for them when they're struggling. And then lastly, we spread this by creating a system of compassion amongst us. And I'm so grateful and happy to be working along closely with Pippa Rowcliffe and Joanne Schroeder, who are doing a ton of work in this field. And I put this up here because, creating compassionate systems and creating leadership around compassion is a huge work that they're doing. And I'm so grateful to be jumping in and working with them. And how do we embed the social emotional learning and well-being throughout their district? And there's a fact sheet that they've printed, and you can see it on the slide here. Go to edcan.ca/facts on education so that you can learn more about how to take this beyond just the practices that I offer you today, which is for yourself, and diving into it for your whole system in your schools, in your districts. And let's get this spreading amongst everywhere in where we work. I've just given you a very small touch and a taste in this very short time together. Feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions, we're going to take a few minutes in a second to just have any questions. So if you have any questions, you can start now throwing them into the question mode here, and we will take a few questions, and I'll take a few time to answer any questions that are coming. In the meantime, you're welcome to check out my website, lisabaylis.com, where I share exercises, practices, and more experience on how to dive into more self-compassion, or following anywhere I am on social media so we can continue to have more of this kind of work in our schools. So if you have any questions or any reflections on the experiences that we just went through, I would love to hear how they are. You can just throw them into the chat now. And if you don't have any questions, but you have an experience of how that felt for you, whether it was easy or difficult, I'd love to hear them right now. So feel free to throw them up here. I see the first one. Andre says, why are we more compassionate towards other people versus towards ourselves? Is that human nature? What explains it? You're super curious about that. Yeah. I don't know that it's human nature. I think actually we're highly compassionate beings. This is our first response. And what happens though is that we get so stuck, Andre, in that fight or flight system or that drive system that we actually forget to attend to our own caregiving system. We have a really hard time showing up for other people or for ourselves in those moments, but we have always enough capacity for other people. I always share the story. When my son was a couple years ago, I got to walk him to school one day, and I was really struggling. I was having a day where I was burnt out and I had to stay home. I was really ill, but I walked him to school and I was just like, I could barely stand up. And while he was there training for school for a cross country race, he tripped and he fell, like spread out, fell on the asphalt. And it was in that moment where I was like, I have nothing left to offer myself, but I had enough compassion to give him. We always have enough compassion for ourselves. We have stopped practicing giving it to ourselves. We have, and I don't know that it's human nature. I don't have this research. Kristen does a lot of research, like you said, like I showed in that first slide. Generally, 80% of us tend to be more compassionate to other people because it's kind of a little bit more harder to be kind to ourselves. We've created these judgments a little bit more towards ourselves, and our inner critic has taken over. There are people out there who are really gentle with themselves all the time. So I think we have to be very gentle in how we talk about this, but I'm super curious about it too. I think this is why these practices are so important, because we've forgotten to continue to attend to that caregiving system within us. We've forgotten to learn how to meet ourselves with kindness, and we've let perfectionism tendencies take over and that inner critic take over for years. And so, this is why we're here today, is learning how to practice coming back to those. I hope some of those questions, or that answered your question a little bit, Andre. What are some of the strategies you suggest for those who experience compassion fatigue? Oh, Sarah, thank you. So first of all, I want to attend to that concept called compassion fatigue. Compassion is a positive emotional response. We actually, our brain lights up when we're compassionately responding in our prefrontal cortex. So if compassion is a positive response, we actually can never get tired of it. Again, that's like, I was burnt out and fatigued, and yet I had enough compassion to continue to give it to my son when he fell and was so exhausted. One of the things that we experience is actually self-compassion fatigue. We stop caring for ourselves. This concept of compassion fatigue or burnout is actually a lot more of empathy. We're so stuck in empathizing and being with people's experience that we get so out of our own body and our own heart. That concept of natsamat, coming back to our head and our heart and aligning it together, having the opportunity to really care for ourselves. So compassion fatigue, I heard Gabor Mate once say, it's not compassion fatigue, it's self-compassion fatigue. When we're experiencing this overwhelm of having nothing left, and my goodness, it's mid-September and I know people are feeling this already. One of the opportunities is to come back to use this for ourselves first. How do we attend to our own hearts so that we have the capacity to show up for everybody else? Because compassion is limitless. We are born being able to offer, and for most of us anyways, we can always continue to give that. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, Sarah. Continue to ask another one if I didn't quite get it. Any other questions or reflections or thoughts about practices today? I can keep talking about compassion fatigue. Well, maybe I'll just take another few minutes to talk about this concept of compassion fatigue while you're generating questions or reflecting on your experience today. Again, compassion fatigue comes from our concept of being in a stress response all the time. So I want to go back to that opportunity to look at some of those three components of self-compassion that we talked about today. A mindfulness awareness. This will help some strategies around compassion fatigue. Actually knowing that we're stressed. What happens for many of us is we don't know that the struggles are coming up. So we're so already in a stress response. The other strategy is to remember we're not alone. We are all going through this, especially right now in September and as educators. And lastly, to meet ourselves during those times with some gentle kindness and tenderness. Mel McIsaac. Oh, Mel. I got to work with Mel for many years here in Victoria, if it's the same Mel. Any recommendations of great meditations, etc., online to help support mindfulness practice sessions when taking time to break? I think you're asking is like, is there practices out there that you can go? There are so many apps and there are so many places to start. I highly recommend Insight Timer as an app to, even start 5 or 10 minutes. Another app is calm.com, CALM. They have a 10-minute practice that you can do as a great place to start from every day. They also have kids stuff that you can share on that app. Headspace is another beautiful app. There are other practices online. If you're really loving the self-compassion practices, you can go to the Center of Mindful Self-Compassion, and they have all kinds of actual self-compassion practices that you can use and practice with. Again, like all of these are practices, again, like most mindfulness things, it's easy in concept, but it's not always easy to do. And it takes practicing and embodying it on a regular basis to continue to come back to it. So check out my website, lisabayles.com. I'm hoping to have that self-compassion break practice up on my website by the end of next week, so you can have access to that as well. If there's no other questions or comments, then just an invitation to come back to my website and see. And if you have any further questions or you want to share your feelings and experience with this, then you're welcome to reach out to me via email. It's info@lisabayles.com. I hope that today's session gave you just a little bit of a self-compassion break, one that maybe you needed to help you during this difficult time. Maybe September's been challenging for you, that self-compassion is something that you can access. Continue to practice it for yourselves and know that these practices are available to you anytime, anywhere. And we can do them because they're internal practices, they're within us, that we can just meet ourselves gently with a bit of tenderness. Go slow and be really gentle with this. So thank you. I have nothing unless you have any more other questions. This is the end of this lovely webinar. I hope that you'll continue to reach out. I'm so grateful for those of you who made the time to show up today. I know how difficult it is on a Friday at the end of a really long week to put aside some time. And if you're watching this later on, thanks for coming back to it. I'm really grateful you did. So good, and so thank you. That's it from me. Have a really lovely weekend. Attend to all your well-being needs. Sometimes self-care looks like a bubble bath and a glass of wine or a nice walk around the block, but sometimes it's actually about what do you really need to take care of yourself? What are the boundaries you need to set? And what are you going to do to listen to your deep needs? So thank you for showing up. Stay in touch, and I'm really grateful you were all here today. Thank you for your insight and practice and joining in with me too. I'm just watching all the thank yous in the chat. It was a lovely way to end of my day too.